Welcome back, pals, to a new video. I'm here with Team Pseudo Summon. That's Derek and Curtis. Congratulations on your win, guys, and thanks for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much, and congratulations on the first game jam.
Oh, thank you. It was a real pleasure to run and a pleasure to see games like yours be made.
Yeah.
So first question, what brought you guys into Indie Tales? How did you find the community and the channel and the jam?
For me, the first exposure I had to Indie Tales was recommended your video that was your 4-year kind of retrospective on your development of Insignia. And I was getting a lot of recommended videos on like indie devs and you know these personal projects, and it was one of those things where it's just you see those and it's great motivation as someone who's kind of working in a similar space, though a lot earlier in their careers. It's one of those things that it's a source of inspiration. So it's always good to see.
Oh, that's great. What about you, Derek?
I actually was first introduced to the Indie Tales community actually through this game jam. So Curtis and I wanted to compete in a game jam, and we were talking about it, and it just sort of happened to be a convenience of time. So I looked on, at the time we were deciding, I looked on itch at all the game jams that were coming up, and Indie Tales one just happened to be the one the week after we were discussing it, and we just decided, hey, this one looks cool, let's do this one. A bunch of people are joining this one and it looks pretty neat. So that was actually my introduction to this community.
Wow, lucky us.
Yeah.
So have either of you participated in any game jams in the past?
No, this is our first game jam mission.
It's a great entry for first try.
The introduction of like building something in such a short amount of time, it's kind of an intimidating thing to get into. And I think that's really like kind of the barrier for me, that like it was like, I don't know, it seemed like the time constraint would like almost make it like be more of a limitation, but it's a source of it's a really good test, I guess. It's one of those things like we both kind of agreed that we wanted to kind of challenge ourselves.
How long did it take for you to like come up with the idea for your game, and did you do any prep beforehand?
As far as like prep before the jam, so we knew that we wanted to enter this jam about a week in advance. And so obviously Curtis has a lot more experience. He's been working in the past with Unity. I have a background in software development, but I've never actually done any Unity development. So part of the prep before the jam was I spent the week kind of just diving into Unity and just being, getting familiar with the language and the engine itself. As far as prep within the jams, I would say, the first half a day we probably spent, we didn't actually do any coding or anything. We just kind of tried to figure out, what is the game going to be? What are we doing? Try to scope it out. What's in scope, what's out of scope, that changed over time, but we wanted to get a general idea of what we were making before we even started doing anything.
And what was your schedule like during the jam? Did you sleep much? How did you plot out your time?
They were fairly long days. We used most of the time, no all-nighters or anything, but I would say, on average, it was probably 15 hours a day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So
I think the Discord calls was averaging about 15 hours, but we took breaks midday just to like kind of decompress a little bit, because obviously staring at a screen for that long, for that like intensive an experience, it's like you're gonna burn yourself out. So
the theme for this jam was one room. How did you guys approach that?
Going in with the design, like being our first game jam, there was questions about how much we were going to be able to get done. And the theme of one room, we kept very simple and straightforward. In terms of the actual scope of the game, it was good, because we could essentially use the theme as like a hard limitation. We're only going to have like one screen, and with one screen, we basically decided like we basically build it as a boss fight, and it would take place in a single room, and the actual room itself evolved as kind of the aesthetics evolved, where we were originally thinking maybe like the room was a book itself and it was open, and like, you know, the pages were the room. And then we thought, well, if we could expand that to like a whole, almost like a study of a wizard, the idea of kind of having like this weird, like almost like planar fantasy aesthetic came up. And having the centerpiece of the room be this like summoning circle was kind of something that stuck in terms of the idea. That's
great. So what was the dev process like for this game? How did you divide up your work, and how did the game look for the most part of developing it? Did you have something that looked really good up front, or was there a lot of early graphics and prototyping at the beginning?
I would say, well, as far as the actual development of most of the visuals, I mean, that's mostly, I would say 95%, that's all Curtis, because he's the one with the Blender experience in this. But as far as like, yeah, it was mostly dev visuals up until, you know, Sunday. The first 2 days were purely just, our process was make the game work and make the game be playable. And then the focus on the last day was actually make the game presentable. So that entire, I would say most of the last day was, you know, visuals and audio and just general polish.
So am I right in understanding that was all of the presentation values Curtis and the code Derek?
Not quite, no. So essentially, in terms of code, we both contributed pretty evenly. We were like, you know, going all in on code and just capsules and cubes, you know, not worrying at all about how it looked. We split it kind of like player and boss, where it's like we kind of took, like, one person took the player, other took the boss, and then when one got hung up, like, we'd bounce back and forth to see what each other were doing. In terms of the actual aesthetic, which is obviously audio and visual, I didn't touch anything audio. It was all Derek.
Wow.
While I was just hashing out a lot of the visual assets, and we kind of split that part once all the code was written.
That's a really interesting way of approaching it, to have both of you taking, you know, a hand on the wheel on all of the aspects. That's really awesome. And especially this idea of like one of you taking the boss and one of you taking the player character. They're definitely really quite impressive in terms of how complex the behaviors are for both of those. And being a boss fight, I guess those are the two halves. So I think it makes sense for sure that you would approach it that way. But there's tons of stuff going on in terms of the different moves and the way that each of the different attacks are balanced, and the presentation. How did you guys approach that? Was it iterative? Did you just add them as you went along, or did they all sort of drop in first and then kind of just chisel away at them?
I would say it was probably a kind of an iterative approach. So, you know, the design aspect that we went into was this sort of a shoot 'em up, you know, boss fight, you know, single arena. And so our thought process was that the biggest part of the gameplay was going to be how we fight the boss. You know, the boss moves were kind of everything in terms of what's going on in the game. And so our focus at the beginning was basically get the boss to shoot projectiles, like just spawn projectiles and shoot them. And then the second step was like, can we make them shoot patterns? And once we sort of had a framework for the boss to be shooting, you know, patterns like that, then it just became a sort of process of developing content for it, so to speak. So it was like, okay, well, we can shoot a pattern of bullets. Let's see what happens if I make like the, you know, the cross pattern, right? I put the cross pattern in, and then it's like, okay, well, it's coming top to bottom. Let's do right to left. And then it was kind of just mixing and matching stuff like that to kind of create, you know, interesting patterns that the player has to avoid.
In terms of like creating projectiles and creating a foundational system of projectiles first, the boss has like two phases, one where he's flying around and like one where he casts all the fireballs. And for the 3 of the 4 attacks, actually all of them, all of the 4 attacks when he's flying around, it's basically the same for loop. They're just flavored differently using audio and visuals, where realistically it's working exactly the same. Like the ice wave is firing the pattern with no time in between bullets, But the big the pink barrage attack is the exact same loop, but with a bit of an iteration in between using a coroutine.
Right.
So once you have a foundational system that like we can fire projectiles, we can take damage. At that point, you're reusing that a lot, and the way you flavor them aesthetically is largely going to be like your workhorse, where you don't actually really need to change much in order to get a lot of variety out of a small system like that.
That's a really, really interesting idea. This notion that the variety comes from the visual presentation and just slight, parametric changes to what is at its heart a very simple and straightforward system. It sounds like it came together really naturally. Was there anything in particular that broke or that was a real challenge to implement?
There were a few things that did end up hitting the cutting floor just because, we realized with time constraints and stuff like that this is going to be kind of hard to figure out given what we have. And also, kind of what Curtis just touched on, it was sort of like once we had the system of firing projectiles and making boss patterns in place, we realized like, well, this is really simple, but it's also really versatile, and we can just kind of double down on this, and we can have a lot of different attacks and stuff. And so we almost didn't have to worry about, oh, this one feature is really tricky, how we're going to implement it. It was more that we went, okay, we know we have this thing that works, it's pretty solid, it's pretty versatile, let's just stick with this and try and make content out of that rather than try and figure out oh, well, let's also add this, and then run into a wall and be like, well, now we're stuck spending time trying to fix this. We just kind of went with what worked.
Am I right in guessing that there wasn't really that hard of a concrete kind of like feature set or identity that the game had beyond its like napkin description?
As you said, it was kind of a napkin description of the core game loop, because we really, like, if you break it down, it's kind of like you have the player that can move and shoot, and they're dodging the boss, which is moving and shooting, and we're kind of like, well, it's sort of like a shoot 'em up, and that was really it as far as like the very like core aspects of the game. And so the actual identity of the visuals and the sound and everything else, and kind of like what the actual projectiles are, and kind of setting the scene that came out during the polishing and visuals, the actual aesthetic aspect phase.
Oh, I think that's a really awesome approach, to start with something that you think might be fun, and then just follow the fun, and then make that pretty at the end. I mean, it's clearly ended with a result that's definitely standout. I mean, it was for sure, I would say, the most beautiful and aesthetically, whether it's like the sound or the visuals, it was really, really a joy to play and to be in. In fact, it was one of those things where I kind of felt like I wanted more. Like, I noticed like the animations in the characters are very fluid. They're really, really great. And I think in my review, one of the criticisms that I gave was, I wish I could see those characters from a different angle, maybe in the intro or in a death screen or something, because they're so awesome and interesting. Do you have a favorite part?
In terms of like visual aesthetic, I'm really happy with how the floor turned out. And that's a funny thing to say, like, without explanation, but we knew that, like, we have a fixed camera angle and the focus is on the ground. And it's like, well, we can make that ground as interesting as possible now. We don't have to worry about the camera, like, moving at all. And that's kind of one of the things that's like, you mentioned, like, you'd like to see the characters from a different angle. It's like, as the game is right now, if you've moved to a different angle, it's like all illusion is broken. There's no bounds. Yeah, exactly. But like
with a very thin veil.
With more time, like, absolutely. But the centerpiece of like this massive like chasm that looks like it's like almost like the idea of like a summoning circle that has almost erupted from under the ground, and you're seeing somewhere else than what's natural there, and bending and warping the floor tiles up to kind of like these spires, and setting the room as an absolute mess. In terms of like that central piece, I think that was the most fun to make.
Yeah, I think the floors, now that you mention it, quite an important part, because it has to serve two functions, right? It has to be, it's what we're looking at, but it also can't take too much away from the action and what's happening on screen. Do you think if you had more time, maybe like an extra week on it, or if it was just an unbounded project, what would be the thing that you would spend more time on that you didn't get to spend time on?
More variety of boss attacks, and probably tuning them as well. some of the fireballs that come from the sides and the top, it's for the jam and for the game is how it is. It served its purpose. It was like, well, it was an attack that, it's a visually readable pattern that, the players can dodge. But I would have really liked to do more complicated or more intricate patterns or longer strings of patterns or, other things than that. Because, the boss really only has the part where it spins around the center of the room and then the part where it goes to the top and it, shoots the fireballs from side to side.
So the standard here is really high. What's your background as far as game development?
I've been essentially wanting to make games since like out of high school, but it's been a long road. Essentially, most of it is like I went into school for just computer systems, and I've done 3 years now, moving into like actual game design, traditional schooling. I have 1 more year to go, and this last one, like the first year of actual game design was like so packed. It was an absolute nightmare. But before that, even I had started developing a personal project in Unity as an outlet to just learn as much as I could on the things that weren't going to be taught in school. So I focused a lot on like Blender rigging, 3D modeling, UV unwrapping, like the whole like art and animation pipeline, because I knew that that stuff wasn't going to be covered in school. And what that means is that the personal project didn't go very far, because obviously it's like you want to be building as many systems first as possible, but in terms of progress, it was a great outlet, and that's largely like my background.
What about you, Derek?
I do have background, some professional background in software development, but it's primarily focused on web development. This is the first time that I really worked on software development in terms of actual games, and so that's sort of I feel like that background helped in terms of designing the stuff, and I think that's sort of why I couldn't really do a lot of the work that Curtis did on the visuals. We kind of split up that work based on our strengths. But yeah, sort of what I wanted to focus on in terms of the polishing phase of this sort of thing was the music, just because for me, that's also another passion of mine that I really, want to continue doing as well. Is that's a big aspect of games that I think is just really important to me, is the music within the games. And so I kind of wanted to use this as an outlet to be like, well, I can make something really cool and I can also make some music to go with that that's also really cool. And I really wanted to just, kind of merge those two interests. And so, working on the music was kind of like the logical step for me for this project, right?
Wow. Well, it sounds like the two of you have like such a great overlap of skills. And like, what about in terms of like games that you'd want to make beyond this? Like, is this representative of kind of like your passion, or are there genres or mechanics that you are more passionate about that you'd like to explore in a personal project?
For me, not specifically the fact that it's a shoot 'em up kind of bullet hell sort of game. The genre in particular isn't something that I'm super passionate about, but I think the kind of core fundamentals of this the game is something that I'm interested in exploring, where it's sort of a thing where it's something that's pretty short but pretty challenging, and something that you can really kind of just pick up and try as many times as you want, kind of that really sort of player motivation of like, oh, I really want to beat this. It's really like kind of fast paced. You can retry over and over. I kind of like that arcadey style of a game, where it's sort of like it's simple, but at the same time there's a skill curve to it that is really kind of engaging. And I think those kind of fundamental like ideas are stuff that I would like to explore in other projects, where maybe the core mechanics aren't super expansive or complicated. It's not some large RPG, like 80-hour experience or something like that. But if it's like you can give your player a really simple set of tools and let them kind of learn how to use those tools really well in a shorter time period, I think that's a pretty interesting concept to explore for projects.
I struggle with that personally. I find it a lot of my motivation comes from like the story or the experience. I think the indie like success story is almost, it's very often based around this idea of, well, we had this one mechanic, we had this one idea, and we expanded on it and built it out. I think that's definitely, as far as like jams go, that's the formula, that's the meta.
Yeah, I think that there's a pitfall there too. Like, it's sort of a scoping, like learning how to scope your projects, where you kind of have that thing like, oh, it'd be cool if I did this idea and then this idea and this idea, and you try and bring all these together, and then you end up with something that's not cohesive, or like you never get it done because it's just too complicated, right? And it's sort of trying to find, like, rather than trying to get all your cool ideas in, you want to get like one cool idea, right? And then expand on that, because then you kind of have like, rather than a bunch of wouldn't it be cool if sort of scenarios for a bunch of things, it's like, I know this is cool because I got it working, like it's a tangible result, right?
Yep, for sure. That foundation of like, I know this is fun and I know it works, and so that will never be in question from this point on, because that's what's there from the beginning. I think that's why it works, because it's really hard to design something that's complicated, and games are so complicated, and the more every time you add a thing, the way that intersects with all the other things makes it even more complicated. But not an issue that you guys have with Pseudo Summon. So, congrats. Right. Between the two of you, is there anything that we can do to check out work that you're doing currently? Any social media handles you'd like to plug or anything like that?
For me, I don't have any social media per se. I do have a YouTube channel where I plan on uploading. I have actually uploaded the Pseudo Summon music there. It's something I plan on continue doing. Like I said, I want to continue making projects and make music for that. So I'd like to post stuff there. And then beyond that, I also have our itch. We have our itch.io profiles where we want to post devlogs and stuff like that. So people want to follow us there as well, they can do that.
Great.
Yeah, this whole process of kind of like being a lot more public with like stuff we're creating is brand new. I don't think either of us were like big social media people, but in terms of like currently, Itch is the best place to follow us. I think it's we're definitely going to be working together in the future, and any updates on future projects will be there. In terms of larger social media stuff, we'll see where it goes. We'll start like broadening that kind of influence, and if we do, Itch will be where we'll announce it if people are interested in hearing it, essentially.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations again, Team Pseudo Summon.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure and a blast. So.
Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time.